Okay, great. Well, thanks for being here. And I know there is a change in the schedule. It's 11 p.m. here, but I'm happy to be here, and I know it's early for some of you. So today we're going to talk about virtual waves, semantics in academic literacy, planning and teaching in the time of COVID. This is an experience that we had last year during the breakout of the pandemic. And well, Jen and I had this experience to teach online in different contexts. So I will talk a little bit about planning the course, and this is the context. I work in a public university in Puebla, which is the fourth largest state of Mexico City. Our university is the sixth best university in the country, according to the Latin American rating. And our university offers 81 programs in 4 disciplinary areas. And the admission process generally, we have 45,000 pre-entry students, and only 50% are accepted. And usually, or typically before the pandemics, they did an exam in a single day. But then last year, while in COVID, students could no longer sit exams because of the official social distancing. And instead of a single date, the exam turned into a longer process. So students, that was kind of like while we wait a strategy. So students waited for almost half a year to get started in the university. So during that time, that's how the academic literacy course emerged. So the institution required us to write or to design a course while students waited to apply for the exam. I must say that during that year, the application rate increased from 45,000 students to 73,000 because there was no fee. So more students got enrolled, but the acceptance rate will still be the same, 22,000 students. So what happened then? That was the context. So what happened after that is they revised the writing courses in our university, and they selected this face-to-face course, which was prepared for a small group, 10 to 15 students, that was academic writing in English, and who was intended to pursue genre pedagogy. I must say that this pedagogy is new, or it's something that we are trying to implement, or at least in my school. So we didn't have like a lot of experience, so we thought like a small course will be like a good opportunity to test. But then the challenge was to turn that course, which was taught for a small audience, to remote learning. And instead of 10 to 15 students, now there will be 73,000. It was disciplinary reading and writing, but in Spanish, not in English, still using genre pedagogy. And the students, the background of the students is they do not have, or they had little experience working online. Something interesting about this MOOC or this design is it was that it should be self-managed. That means that there wouldn't be any instructor. So, well, when we learned that we would be designing the course, we had like many challenges. And these are like the ones that we will discuss today. And the first one was teaching disciplinary reading and writing, especially because, you know, teaching writing, it's more like a dialogic construction or for a small audience. Another challenge was the number of students, and the time allowed for design and planning. This course was running from August to November, but we learned about it by the end of June. So it was almost a month to plan it. And finally, the point that was like challenging for me, it was that there wouldn't be an instructor. No? Teaching writing was already difficult, and without an instructor, I was wondering how. And well, I was concerned about it, but then I was thinking, how am I going to teach, or we're going to teach this type of course, especially with these characteristics, learning to read and write at the university. As I said, our university has majors in 4 different areas, which are business and administration, engineering and social sciences, natural sciences and health, and social sciences and the humanities. So it was really a challenge to prepare a course expected to serve everybody disciplinary needs. And also because here in Mexico, teaching writing is an emergent field. Not all, I mean, the curriculum is still being worked on. And you know, it is assumed that students, when they enter to the university, they already know how to read and write, and that is not necessarily true, especially here in this context. And of course, I was not expecting that they could read or write, neither was I expecting that they could read or write in the disciplinary fields, but still we had to work on something. So what we thought it was trying to make this conceptual framework, and we selected genre pedagogy basically to select the material and to select what to teach, and also semantic gravity for pedagogical planning to help us design the activities to teach. In this case, I won't focus so much on genre pedagogy. I will focus, I mean, for this talk, I will focus more on semantic gravity. But I must say that genre pedagogy was useful to select the texts. Also, when you plan a course of this nature, as a planner, it is also challenging to learn, or to know a lot of disciplines. It was a challenge. That was our first constraint. So how we solved it? Well, certainly we didn't know about medicine or marketing or ecology or geography, but we learned, or we knew about genre. So instead of selecting the disciplines, we selected genres, and we selected procedures, explanation, narratives and arguments, and evaluative texts. Also, we talked in this course, we introduced research articles, but that was like a different approach. So I will focus on the genres for now. And this is like a summary of the disciplines that were included for this course. So after this, we had like the collection of texts. We analyzed the text, we identify phases and stages of genre. It was like we had like the raw material. The challenge was now how to make it available to students. So that's how we thought about semantic gravity, because semantic gravity, as we know the definition, refers to the degree to which meaning relates to its context. Semantic gravity may be relatively stronger or weaker along a continuum of strengths. And basically, we focus on these abstract and concrete concepts to relate to that. And also, all meanings relate to a context of some kind. Semantic gravity conceptualizes how much they depend on that context to make sense. This was particularly useful because, as I said, our students didn't have a lot of experience with the text. So we wanted to make them available by reaching them or make connections with concrete experiences. What I didn't want it was to throw them a bunch of PDFs No, it's like something like we had literally PDFs as in the analysis, we had readings and we had text. And it could have been easy in saying, okay, here is the material, go for it. You have to do it on your own. But we didn't want the students to have that experience. So we thought about semantic gravity as a way to design these pedagogical experiences, and following Matruglio, Martin, and Mayton, jointly constructing waves. And an effective teaching strategy is unpacking ideas, explaining abstract concepts, providing examples, models, and everyday language, and also repacking, linked to more abstract ideas. And of course, this is like a full wave, but in each of the stages, you can have like a little waving. So you can do a lot of things in each of the stages. So we had the material, as I said, we had like a genre analysis. And what we did later was to recontextualize this material and in different formats so that students could experience it in different ways. So we came up with this list of types, or this type of text. Each activity or material is represented by an icon. So the first one is the reading itself. So that's the original text from the different disciplines that we selected. The video, it's me explaining the text or trying to contextualize the reading, and also explaining some key concepts. Also, we have some annotated texts or PDFs, and inside those PDFs, so we put this attention mark, so that they could identify key concepts. Also, we had different type of exercises. We had comprehension questions out of the readings and out of the genre, out of the texts. Also, we had some interactive texts. These two items were kind of like an evaluation, but they were not assessed. They were not part of the grade. It was just for the sake of practicing and doing exercises. After that, we came up with a writing task. Students were required to write a sample text or of the genre that we were studying in a unit. And finally, they did a self-evaluation. So this one was a part of their grade, and well, it was like basically like a multiple choice test. So this is the material. So what I'm going to show you now is my thinking, or the way I picture this. I must say that this is like how I picture it to work. This is my reasoning behind the putting the material together in the MOOC. So, for example, the reading, I put it in like weak semantic gravity, and then the video was a strong semantic gravity, and in the middle ground, I put like a text or materials that were controlled or which had a kind of orientation of the teacher, but not necessarily the picture of the teacher. So the key concepts, I put it on above the middle range because they contain mostly abstract concepts. And also, as you can see in this example, for example, this was teaching the procedure in nursing. So we had the first reading, which was completed by a wave. Like in the middle of the lesson, we show them with another procedure. So that means another reading. In this case was another text that was an administrative business administration text. So they did practice with that, and they did a lot of another activities, and at the end they come up with a small text to write a procedure. So this is like the waving it took, but if we look at a more general wave, we can see like waving down and trying to wave up a little bit. And I say trying because I want to emphasize that this is my reasoning behind it. But just to give you an idea of what I did in order to wave down is I asked students to read the text or watch the video first. And in the video, I recommended them to watch it first, and as they prefer reading or watching. But what I did in the video was try to contextualize the text. So in this case, I situated myself in a nursing room and I asked my students, okay, have you ever been to a nursing room? Have you had this testing experience, etc.? So what I was trying to do is connecting them with the text or with the reading. Later in the video, I explained the genre. In this case, I'm sorry, this is in Spanish, I didn't translate, but basically that are the genre stages, which are the goal, the materials, and the steps to accomplish that. So in the video, I explained that. They also had the opportunity to do interactive exercises and review the material on their own. And also one exercise that was not related to any discipline, but it was just write an origami, a procedure for this origami. And they had to practice the objective, the material, and the steps of the genre. And we did similar, it was like a protocol. We followed the same way for all the texts that we applied. So we followed the same pattern for teaching a text in medicine. We followed the same pattern to teach a narrative in marketing, and the same pattern to teach an argument. So this was 2 lessons to teach the same text. So there were like 4 texts, if I remember well, that was a philosophy text and an ecology text. So that was pretty much the pattern that we followed. And well, one point that I wanted to emphasize, or one of the struggles that I mentioned at the beginning, was that there wouldn't be a teacher in the class. So I was wondering, how am I going to make the teacher present in the text? So I was playing with this concept of presence. You know, this that was hard at that moment, and it still is. But I know that through different resources, you can linguistic resources, you can create a space of the you and me with your students. So it was also a challenge to design the videos. At the beginning, the first rehearsal or the first trial was with one of my students. I asked her to let me explain something. And the first explanation was very, I don't know, mechanic. And I was not even connected with her. And we were on a Zoom session. And she was like, what's going on here? Well, anyway, so that helped me to change the discourse of the teaching. So instead of presenting an explanation, a very technical explanation, I was literally talking as if I was speaking with the students. So in that way, I tried to create a presence in the text. Well, so far, this is my reasoning behind what I will show you now is some of the results. Well, not results, because that was not really research. It's a survey that I asked students and some of the findings.
Sorry, before you go on, Vicky, can I just interrupt here, please?
Yeah. So
what I find so fascinating about what you've done in this context is the similarities that you've done in terms of this course and what we did in terms of the teacher choices in action module, which was also about online learning for work instead of putting the students in the schools. Because what we also did was to use semantic waves as a way of structuring the learning experience, and very, very deliberately. and it kind of gives a sense of what, where to start and where to go next. And it's just really interesting to see how you've done that. And we followed very much the same kind of structuring or planning processes. So I just thought that was just something useful, because it's coming from two completely different fields, but yet we both used those semantic waves as a way of kind of, how do we sequence this? How do we sequence it in a logical way, in a coherent way, so that there's a coherent learning process. So I just wanted to say that I've enjoyed seeing that.
Thank you. And that was really useful. I must say that this one influenced the planning, but I didn't use semantic waves to actually teach students.
Yes.
So students never were exposed to those concepts, but certainly the semantic waves underpin the planning and this way of making things available for them, especially in a course of this nature, which especially for writing, which was not necessarily requires more being together, to teach. I saw somebody else raising their hand. Andrea?
Yes, Vicky, thank you very much. I'm sorry, this is the second time that I see this presentation, but I still have questions. Like, this is a compliment for you, because what you've done is very interesting, and there's a lot of more of room for discussion. And I am wondering about what you said before, that the students were not exposed to these concepts, semantic gravity and semantic gravity. And I am wondering, what if you have done it, not so in Mayton terms, but for example, when you say, so the purpose of this task is that we are going to go from the abstract to the general and go back to the abstract. Because, well, I am very familiar with Mexican education, and I have to say that it's a lot of memorization. I am thinking that probably out of those 73,000 students that you had, there were some students that said, I mean, a video, I am going to watch a video for my university exam. I mean, what? I don't want to do this. I mean, just give me the book and I will memorize everything. And that's it. I am sure that there were some who say that, because that's the kind of education that we receive. But I am wondering if you have made this more explicit. So I am showing you this video for this purpose, and then we are going to learn more abstract concepts. I wonder if you had a different result or more positive feedback, or the students would have reacted like, interesting, this is new, I am engaged.
Well, yeah, thanks, Andrea, for pointing this out. That was like actually the ideal, and honestly, I had it in my mind. That's something that I would like to do, but I only had a month to do all this. And that was really time constraints. I couldn't do it, but Jennifer will talk about an experience. When we were preparing for this talk, we say, well, that's nice how our talks complement each other, because I'm just presenting the reasoning of designing this, but she's actually presenting what happens in the class. And that, of course, will be like a good combination. But thank you.
Maybe next pandemic you will have more time.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Well, thanks. So as I was saying, this is like the reasoning behind, but here I have some of the students' comments out of the survey that I applied. So one of the questions was, what activities facilitated learning? I mean, in terms of writing and reading. And the item was to organize from the most to the least. So on top, we have like readings. So maybe you recognize the items, that's in Spanish, but we have the readings, then the videos, then we have comprehension exercises, then annotated PDFs, then writing assignments, then a downloadable PDF, which that was basically a compilation of the material, and self-evaluation and peer evaluation of the writing tests. So that was interesting for me to see because, Andrea, you were saying, do I have to watch a video? But that was interesting that they said that actually that's the video was what made them learn, or what facilitated learning. And since we like playing with waves, when I turned this upside to the other right, well, I rotated this, I could see a wave. So my original thinking, or my intention when designing this, of course, was having students waving up, but apparently the exercises only help them to deconstruct the text and advance in that regard. But of course, given the context and given the nature of the course, that this was a huge accomplishment. Some of the students' comments, so the survey was responded almost by 16,000 students, so I made like a categorization of most common comments. So they say, I like the course. I found interesting this comment. It was entertaining. I put it in like in the positive, so something like got their attention. The video made me feel accompanied. The way the course was organized helped me to understand, and it helped me to understand what an argument is. And of course, we have these students who perceived it as too repetitive, perhaps not in the content, but in the pattern of or in the way the material was presented. And some of them said that PDFs were unnecessary. So that was one of the reasons why we tried other things instead of just PDFs. Well, just to wrap up some numeralia here, as I said at the beginning, we had 73 pre-entry students were supposed to take an entry exam, but only 56,000 enrolled in the course. 36,000 were active students, and only 21,000 students completed the course. Most of them were granted, if the students completed while we wait activities before the exam, the entrance exam, they were granted access to the university. So, and also this is like a huge number given that there is a lot of dropout rates in MOOCs. So as a conclusion, I can say the variety of interactive materials such as videos, readings, and exercises enable shifts down the semantic scale to connect with students' experience. Iterative pedagogical sequences provided participants with the opportunity to experience different disciplinary genres. Iteration also helped with cumulative knowledge building of academic reading and writing, or at least that was the intention. More analysis of knowledge practices is needed about the potential of semantic waves for MOOC design, and especially for this virtual environment. But at least in this case, semantic gravity was effective for planning and responding to circumstantial needs, that given by COVID. So, well, that's all. Thank you. I know if you have questions.
Vicky, sorry, I've got a question. Just to clarify, so these students who did it, they were not yet accepted at the university, but it was one of the preconditions for coming in. Was it, did their performance on your course affect whether they could come in or not, or was it just a kind of a literacy thing that to give them a basic so that those who got in would have that as a foundation? In other words, entrance criteria, was it in any way connected to your course?
No, the purpose of the course was giving them some foundation in reading and writing. But, you know, as the conditions changed here, so they were supposed to do an exam by November, but the conditions were so difficult here, we were in lockdown, they couldn't. So at the end, it was impossible to have them sitting exams. So at the end, I guess it turned into a condition because students who completed the course, not only this, but also other 3 who were just complementary courses to enter to the university. They were granted access because they completed the course. And I must also say that, well, that was a pre-entry exam. So this also worked as a kind of a gatekeeping, you know, how can I say, I mean, as a gatekeeping situation, because, you know, it was like automatic, no? So the numbers was diminishing until they didn't have students. For example, if I was wondering if 36,000 students had completed the course, they would have still had to do the test. But in other words, I must say they were running out of students to enter to the university. So they accepted most of them, except the majors which had more demand, like medicine, like law, and others that I don't remember right now. But for example, for medicine, there were 7,000 students and they only accepted 1,200 students. So yeah, originally it was like a foundation text, course, but then it turned into a gatekeeping activity, I think.
I think it's amazing that what you've done, but especially that it's like a massification literacy thing, you know, opportunity to so many students, you know.
Yeah.
Not just the benefits of those who get admitted, but even for those who don't get admitted, it must in some way empower them. So well done. It's amazingly inspiring.
Thank you.
And this is an example of what did I call it? A sort of tacit practice using LCT. So you don't necessarily mention any LCT. That's right. It underpins the structure of the curriculum and maybe the way you teach, maybe the way you know do the lectures or whatever, that sort of thing, instead of being something made explicit.
Yeah, the intention, I mean, I thought about it, but then, you know, it was difficult because of time, but, you know, that would be like another project, no?
Well, I was going to ask whether you'd be tempted to, I mean, nobody needs to always make explicit the concepts, but I was wondering whether, I mean, because there's many courses that have been where semantic gravity, semantic density, or just the basic idea of semantic waves, for example, have been used to structure the order of curriculum, the sequencing, or the way in which lectures are sequenced and structured. So it's not necessary to bring it to the surface. It can be just part of, you know, one's professional skill base as a teacher. But I was wondering if you would be tempted, if you're tempted to do so, because I know that you've taught waves before to people for use in understanding how to write their assessments.
Yes, definitely. I'm tempted. You know, somebody told me once you learned waves, you don't want to stop doing it. So I'm thinking about my next project will be to use waves to teach academic writing, to support students writing, maybe to do a writing center or something like that.
That would be amazing. I mean, it's amazing you did that in just a month. If I had a month, I think I'd just go on leave and give up. but no, that's an amazing job. But I know that you've done that before, so I was wondering whether you'd be tempted to do that at some point, because it's quite empowering as well to
Yeah.
but it is very difficult to achieve waving online, I find. Like I was doing teaching on Monday of a unit that has virtually no content. So it is a process. They like to say it's a process-based unit, which means there's no content. And it's about interdisciplinary projects. So there's no content at all, but they expect the students to work together in teams and to reflect on themselves and their disciplines without giving them any tools to analyze knowledge. So they're somehow supposed to go meta. And it was just so hard. About 75% of my students are in China at the same time and just want to know what the content is. So it's like, it can be very, very difficult. And there's just a point at which I'm reaching now where I'm just unable to get much further. So I'm going to introduce them to semantic waves, not because LCT, I want to bring in LCT into everything, or but simply because these students have nowhere else to go. They've got no means of being able to talk about their disciplines and where they're coming from and the interdisciplinary project units. And they also can find them useful for figuring out how to structure their assignments. So I was very reluctant because I don't want to do any work for this unit. I don't want to do any work at all. I want to do the minimum amount of prep. I want to do as little as possible because I hate the unit. But I'm finding myself tempted to bring in LCT simply because it's going to help rescue these students from the horror of being in a kind of vacuum. I'm not saying that's happening here, but I was just interested to see if you in the future might be tempted to teach them waves in order to be able to think about how they can do their university assessments and writing. So
Yeah. I'm teaching with waves, I work in an English language teaching context. So teacher training, and students have to write like range of academic papers and especially reflections. And, they need some training on that because they usually stay at the level of description. And I've been using semantic waves to help them develop writing, and it's been working like on a small scale. I mean, in the classroom level, it is working. So definitely I want to try out to expand to other classes or other types of texts.
if anybody else has, you can also, by the way, jump in later on as well. But if anyone else has got any comments or questions or thoughts right now, otherwise we'll just jump in and talk. And otherwise we'll move on to Jennifer, shall we? Unless anyone's got anything to say. And you can also jump in at any time to talk about Vicky's work as well.
Going once, twice. Yeah, fantastic.
Go for it, Jennifer. But as I said, if somebody wants to come in and say, I've just thought of something I want to ask Vicky, they can do. Anything's possible anytime.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vicky, and everybody else for being here at this hour. I'm just going to take a moment and set this up as best I can, confirming that you can see my screen. Anybody? Can you see my
Yes,
title?
yes, we can.
Okay,
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Move that over there. All right. So I am shifting a little bit from Vicky talking about her work in planning, and mine is focusing on the pedagogy and with the old adage, if you want to learn something, teach it. So I was introduced to LCT in Boston, where I met a couple of you there, and I've been working with Jody Martin here at UBC, and we've got a book chapter on critical reflection using specialization under review. But this presentation here is a teaching demonstration rather than an analysis. The context in which I'm teaching is at UBC Vantage College. It is, my students are exclusively international students coming in at an upper intermediate level of English language proficiency. They complete their first year of UBC in their disciplinary courses. I teach in the Faculty of Arts and I teach academic English. And then successful students then move on into their subsequent years of study at UBC with an undifferentiated transcript. And we offer embedded language support. So English for academic purposes that is really discipline specific. So I look at valued language practices in political science, history, human geography, sociology. It's very much genre and systemic functional linguistics informed. And in my case, a pretty critical orientation. So the guiding principles, I've been teaching this course since, iterations of this course since 2014, but COVID's a little bit different. The guiding principles, these are the things that I focused on in my courses. Developing meta-linguistic awareness of language choices in these disciplinary texts, very much prioritizing practice and process rather than just a perfect performance of summative assessment. I incorporate a fair bit of group work, which is quite contentious, and I'm happy to discuss that a little bit more. And then I've been involved in a teaching and learning enhancement project over the last couple of years of self-regulated learning and self-regulated learning supportive practices. And these include really transparent instructions available to students at the outset of assignments, very consistent criteria that allow for formative feedback and feed forward, doing inventories of skills and goals, explicit connections between tasks, lectures, activities, feedback, and the like, and really working on developing cumulative learning. This is fairly consistent in my teaching approach, but in the time of COVID, and because the students are all around the world and all remote, I elected to do most of my course, not all, but 90% of the course asynchronously so that students around the world could access, which was quite complicated when you really want to front group work and collaboration. And the way in which I organized the course were in these major units. And so beginning sort of with building blocks, remembering that's a language course. So the constituents of clauses, monster noun groups, processes and purposes, circumstances, and a lot of work around paraphrasing. In the second unit, I looked at the texture of text, so building logic and different stages and features. And this is where I had a lecture on semantic waves, or a unit or a module that I'll share with you today. And then after Christmas, it was a 26-week course. So I did have 2 semesters to work with a student, getting into evaluation and then argumentation. And all of this was spiraling and revisiting these different components in service of more and more sophisticated deployment. And then there was a very final module on reflective writing. Within each of these units, there were 4 consistent components with a mix of individual and group tasks. The instructions and the assessment were consistent, allowing for feedback to feed forward for the next iteration. So I'm going to share with you today some of the lecture components and the learning activities. These were always available to students to watch again and again whenever they wanted, or to go back weeks later, because I would make explicit mention of them in subsequent lessons as needed. As a group, and these groups were consistent throughout the 26 weeks of the course, they had to choose a text that they were going to look at and annotate and focus on for the duration of one of those 4 units. And then they would do their annotations individually, but they could see one another's annotations and were expected to respond to one another. And then finally, there would be a synthesis, a group, right, where they highlighted the key features that worked in that text, sort of representing what they had learned through that unit. And so these were consistent for those 4 units I showed a moment ago. So within the second unit of the course, I introduced semantics with student-friendly introduction, building on features that I'd already introduced and situated within students' disciplinary readings. The key components were types of information, a simplified translation device, exemplification through disciplinary texts, and really a warning against flatlining. This lecture was recorded so students could watch it and re-watch it at their leisure. So the way in which I introduced information were these different types here. So indicating that there are different types of information and they're more appropriate in some contexts than others. So very much moving away from a rule-based conceptualization of language, and that language is choices that are situated for the goal and the purpose and the audience, so that they're not necessarily wrong, but they're situated. So talking about abstract information, that it's disassociated from any specific instance. Concrete is naming a real thing or a class of things, or it's characterized belonging to an immediate experience. It's real or tangible. That something that's general is involving or relating to or applicable to a general, every member of a class or kind, and it's not confined by any limitation. Whereas specific is restricted to a particular individual situation. And vague, something that's not clearly expressed, and students do get this in their feedback from their other disciplinary instructors. It's not clearly defined, grasped, or understood, and really it's only good for secrets. My simplified translation device was, this is the overview of it, and talking about the idea of gravity. And as has been the case for many of us, the idea of weak semantic gravity being high and strong semantic gravity being low is challenging, but that the gravity is tied to a specific context. It's closely tethered to something in particular, whereas low gravity means it's more abstract and covers a wider range of situations and examples. So this is how I introduced the overall, and then getting closer into the different bands and closer layers at the different, look at the different layers of the translation device. And remember that students are getting familiar with SFL terminology. So talking about participants being highly nominalized, they're familiar with this terminology, attributive relational processes for description and for definition, that there's not a lot of circumstantial details that limit the context, and we've done work on circumstances, that information may be in introductions or concepts or theories with more summarized citation to multiple research sources. Then at a neutral level of semantic gravity, more generalizations and patterns, the mid-range, not too heavy, not too abstract, some nominalizations, increased modification, the pre and the post modification to clarify and to limit. That there might be identifying relational processes to define and therefore limit the focus, mental or thinking processes and verbal or speaking processes to recount others' analyses. And that information may be explanations, comparisons, and analyses. And in my experience working with novice scholars, that this is a stage that many of them miss. We see a lot of yo-yoing between very weak semantic gravity at the abstract level and jumping straight down to examples without this mid-range of making the connection of the generalization or a definition of what it is that they're talking about. And then again, talking about citation, but again, of others summarizing them. And then at the strongest gravity, most closely tied to context, we've got unpacked noun groups, lots more specifying details, a lot more circumstantial information to contextualize and specify this contextual information, lots more material and behavioral. This is the doing and behaving, and it's highly situated. And then a lot more data, quotes, and examples, again, strongly contextualized. So this is the way in which I introduced it to my first year English as an additional language academic students. Then to contextualize it to some of their disciplinary readings and their other courses, this one tied in really nicely to a psychology text that they were reading this very week on categorization as an aspect of cognitive development. So pulling from the text here, that early psychological theories described concepts as rules that specify the necessary and sufficient conditions for membership in a particular category. A necessary condition is something that must be true of the object in order for it to belong to the category. For instance, suppose you were trying to determine whether an unfamiliar animal was a dog. It is necessary that the creature be a mammal, otherwise it doesn't belong to the category dog because all dogs are mammals. A sufficient condition is something that, if it is true of the object, proves that it belongs to the category. Suppose someone told you that the creature was a German Shepherd, and you know that a German Shepherd is a type of dog. German Shepherd is a sufficient condition for a membership in the category of dog. So this is a snip from the students' weekly reading from their psychology textbook. But to bring it back into semantics and make it more accessible to students, I separated the sentences and then told the students to pause the video and take a few minutes to determine if they could figure out what type of information is in each sentence. And remembering that the students aren't expected to be mastering it. This is just in place of in-face instruction. The students can pause and go back as needed. And then here they are color coded, and how I coded them for semantic gravity using the same tagging that I had in the introduction to it. But then in order to help make them see it, I plotted them on a plane of semantic gravity to show the waves and the movement. So these are the same sentences that we looked at previously, but at a weaker semantic gravity, a definition at the mid-range, a particular example, waving up with an explanation and another definition, and then an example, and then waving up, and showing them that there is movement. I also pulled from another reading to show that there are different texts have different waves, but they move, and that's really what's important. And to summarize this, to show the student that they've got to move through ideas, that flatlining at a high semantic gravity with lots of examples but no discussion or ties to theory will get you a comment like, so what? Whereas flatlining up here with very little semantic gravity makes it sound like you're mentioning lots of theories without really knowing what you're talking about. And what we want to see is the movement, not prescriptive in how the movement is, but that there is movement. And then further,
so I'm just going to jump in for a second, because there's something you just said there which I think is really important, is that one of the reasons we do want waves in our assessments is often to be able to see that they do understand stuff. I mean, it's not just because we like waves. It's not because we're fetishizing, a particular way of doing something. It's because if they throw theory at the page, you have no clue if they know what any of those terms mean unless they can give examples and concretize them or apply them in some way, isn't it? And the same thing in the opposite direction is that, yes, you can describe things down at the bottom, but are you able to explain it using some of the knowledge that we've been teaching you? So the idea of, I mean, it's such an obvious thing, but
these are first year students who are writing essays in history and essays in geography, and they need to define, and they're getting feedback from teaching assistants and people who are disciplinary specialists, but not necessarily academic literacy specialists, who aren't really sure how to guide them. And they'll get comments like vague or so what, or give me an example. And so this is to try to mitigate that to some extent.
Yeah, I've never forgotten the first feedback I got from a guy called Tom Shakespeare, who became very famous in disability research. Actually, he's like a world leader in it. And he was a supervisor of mine at university, and he wrote on my first essay that it was flabby, and I had no clue what that meant. No clue what that meant.
Or my inclusion of the word vague in the types of information from the outset, because I want this to be contextualized and relevant to the students as they're writing these first year papers or these first year texts, and they are expected to define what it is that they're talking about as well. To further contextualize it, this is from one of their other readings, and it's impenetrable. So I acknowledge to the students in the lecture that it can make for introductions like this, where novice readers like me as well get confused because we aren't already familiar with the topic. This author in this excerpt here, this is an introduction, doesn't wave down enough to give us examples that we can understand. And it can make us feel stupid. And it's not that we're stupid, but it's intended for an expert audience. and I'm also trying to build a little bit of solidarity with the students as well around that. There's nothing like feeling stupid as a student, and there's nothing like explaining to the students why that is. So summarizing key points of the lesson, that movement of the text is quite important, and to use this themselves for planning their assignments, and to not flatline. It's very important. So how to do that? To make waves, to wave up, nominalize. And we've had previous lessons on nominalization. Connect to bigger ideas, theories, and concepts, and summarize. To wave down, add details. I've done lots of work on circumstances, using circumstantial probe questions to further elaborate and incorporate pre and post modification in their noun groups. But also to not forget that middle ground. So incorporate those definitions, make the logic explicit, include explanations. And as I said, this is a feature that I find a lot of novice writers skip over. So this is encompassing the lecture that I delivered and recorded to the students. And then I had them do practice learning activities through the learning management system. And these were individual. And I built quiz banks in the learning management system because I really wanted to prioritize learning over performance and grade anxiety. It was very much focused on content mastery. So students had repeated access, and the instructions were to please take the quiz as many times as you need until you get 100%. There were randomized question selection and the answer order. So C was never always the right answer. It rotated through just through the programming that we were able to incorporate. And this was incorporated for the students' individual participation grade, really lowering the stakes around it. So just to recap, this was part one of the unit components. This was the lecture and the learning activities. As a group, the students had to choose a text that they were to annotate, and then I moved into those annotations. Theoretically, the students were annotating that text after every lecture, but they really did batch annotate, and that's just student life for you. In talking about the annotations, remember that I wanted the students to build connections and practice group work, and drawing on Mayton and Chen 2020, I believe 2019, 2020, on different education and cultural values of the co-construction of knowledge is really quite nebulous to different educational backgrounds. So I wanted to make the rationale explicit. So in doing so, these are from my instructions to students, that I wanted them to build a community of learners within their groups through comments, questions, responses, and additional explanations. That this would help them focus attention on the language features used in the writing text, and that focus on language should help them understand the text better, see and review the topics from our course lectures, and then hopefully help them incorporate these valued features into their own writing. My criteria for assessment for these annotations, and these were, while they could see one another's annotations and respond to one another, they were assessed individually. These were consistent throughout the course. The quantity of comments, literally, did they annotate enough? Did they use hashtags that showed the synthesis of analysis of what that comment was about? And were they accurate and representative of the various lectures? Were they accurate in what they annotated and what they commented about it and giving correct details? Were they relevant to meaning making? And were they collaborative? Did they engage with their fellow group members through annotation, remembering that they're around the world and it's asynchronous? So the annotations in class that were specific, class is the collaborative learning annotation system. It's a UBC platform that's similar to Hypothesis, but it conforms to Canadian privacy laws. And so at the end of the semantic lecture, I encourage students to annotate with the following guidelines. I suggested the following hashtags about where the authors waved up or waved down, if they could maybe unpack, revisiting the grammatical metaphor lectures that I'd given previously, looking for patterns in introductions and conclusions, and were there any semantic gravity neutral sort of stations and sections. So these are snips of some groups' annotations, and we see how they've highlighted sections of their shared reading and annotated features that they noticed. So here the students are talking about waving the semantic wave, concepts and patterns as a small semantic gravity. So we've got issues around the nomenclature a little bit. In order to wave up, they're giving advice on nominalizing, providing concepts, patterns, and then they're using some hashtags here. The relational processes, defining a categorization, a response to one another, but also they're disagreeing that summarize isn't a good word because we use this for a low semantic gravity. Generalizing would be better. And then, so some commentary going on in the annotations and responding to specific aspects of the lecture. Another example here from another group, with some specificity of the language features around the logic, but also sort of a bit of that community building in responding to one another in the margins as well. This is a revisited semantics in a subsequent unit on argumentation.
Sorry, Jennifer, can I just ask that? So that's a student comment on another student's.
It's a series of
work.
Students. Yes, I've blocked out the names.
So they
students. They're individual
they're adopting the language the LCT to talk about each other's work. So they're putting it to use themselves. That's really interesting.
Yeah, they're annotating one of their course texts about, in this example here, I think was stronger example here, they're using aspects of semantic gravity at different levels, be it strong or neutral or weak, and how to do it and the features that make it so.
But they're using it as a tool, you know.
Yes.
So I mean, there's different ways in which LCT can be used. Students can be using LCT. Sometimes it could be, say, it's not normally this way, but you can imagine a situation in which they are taught LCT and they have to write about LCT as a sort of topic. There are other ways in which, like Vicky was doing, where LCT sits underneath the architecture of a course, but doesn't appear to the students as content.
Yeah.
And then you've got this sort of thing where it's like it's taught to them not as content to learn, but like as a tool to use as so almost like professional knowledge almost.
I actually think it was incorporated a bit as content to learn, because the lecture quiz that I had about it was about gravity and waves, and there were some true false comprehension about should you flatline or not, or these features are for a weak.
Oh yeah, no, I meant that,
So
but I meant sorry, I didn't explain very well. Yeah, I didn't explain very well. I meant that yes, it was taught as content, but it was then taught as, you know, it's intended for, hopefully for use. So they're, you know,
almost
actually getting to do something with it.
It was another layer of meta language, in the same way we talk about participants and processes and circumstances and interpersonal positioning. And like, this is another layer of meta language about information sorting, if you will. This one here, this was not from Unit 2, that was about the texture of text. This was from many, many weeks later, and they revisited semantics, indicating that they found it a really useful analytical tool for general academic literacy development. And then the final component of the unit was to write a short essay, 3 paragraphs maybe, about the most salient features of a text that they'd worked on for the unit. And the instructions were to describe and analyze the focus of the unit within that chosen text, include definitions where appropriate, how it's formed and used within the text your group has chosen, and then make connections between the features in the text they've annotated throughout the unit and another text. So reading, an assignment, lecture, whatever. And I'm using a very ecumenical definition of text. And these are excerpts from the students' writing. There are still some underlying language inaccuracies or difficulties, but there's also, I think, some sophisticated attention to meaning movement and its purpose. So if you'll bear with me, I'll read it. By annotating the text, we find some language features evolved a lot in this text. Different sections in the whole text are basically follow the rule of semantic waves. In the paragraph below the argument, the first two sentences are giving general concept going to introduce in this part. They are highly packed up and nominalized. There's less circumstances in these two sentences to limit the meaning it's trying to convey. The next sentence is a definition on the terminology new cultural class mentioned in the previous sentence. It's defining the term by an identifying relational process, can be understood as, and a long post-modification who emerged with to make the definition more specific. It's a feature of neutral semantic gravity, which is usually used for focusing and identifying on the idea or concept. The following sentence giving more details to expand the author's argument. An example of high semantic gravity, giving more specific examples to describe how the terms new cultural class looks like. We can see how the semantic wave goes in this paragraph from low to high. It's a short introduction paragraph, so the wave is kind of uncompleted. However, we can still see the author is trying to move smooth in language and helping us understand the meaning he wants to convey. From another group, last but not least, we know that in each paragraph in an article, we must make this paragraph efficient and convincing. It's very important to ensure that the semantic wave floats up and down rather than a straight line. In this article, the author balances the use of definitions, patterns, and examples well. The author always first give abstract concepts and patterns in the paragraph, then give evidence and examples, and finally his own analysis and patterns to ensure that the semantic wave of paragraph floats up and down. The use and variation of semantic waves are also worth noting. One example of that is in the first paragraph, followed by a long quote. Levesque remains a heavy semantic gravity of this section by including a very specific story from a book, and only until the third paragraph, the content starts to wave up to provide his own descriptions or analysis, neutral semantic gravity, of the previous examples. As the text involves a lot of storytelling, examples or quotes from other scholars, strong semantic gravity is also frequently seen, and thus those sentences are normally led by verbal processes such as claim, note, explain, as well as some mental processes with verbs like believe and think. There's also a comparison of different disciplinary texts and patterns, which kind of is the point of this course, from another group. In terms of the semantic gravity and semantic waves, it is also worth noting that Levesque, which is a history text, includes more storytelling and narratives, while Krang, which is a geography piece, prefers using case studies or real-life examples to support its arguments. This also relates to the change of semantic gravity in the two texts. For instance, Levesque's text begins with a long quote and many specific stories that are with heavy semantic gravity and only wave up to some analysis and statements of theories in the third or later paragraphs. Instead of starting with heavy semantic gravity, Krang's geography piece, and in many cases, many other geography texts as well, prefer to begin with some abstract concepts and only wave down when it comes to further explanations and giving examples in the middle of the paragraphs or sections. To sum up, in our opinion, there are more differences than similarities between these two book chapters, but it is understandable as they are from completely different disciplines and target different levels of potential audiences. I've saved perhaps the least sophisticated writing for the last because it's very much about enabling students' performance and not just analytical abilities. And here they touch on application. After this analysis, we can understand the introduction better. I will distinguish which sentence is the narrative sentence and which one is the explanation sentence. We think it can also be used in our writings. We can use descriptive sentences to start an essay and introduce the main topic. After that, we can use semantic gravity neutral sentences to explain, which is a good way to start an essay. So remembering that these are first-year students in an upper intermediate English language proficiency, we see students' uptake of semantics as an analytical tool, and this is adding to their toolkits of academic literacies across disciplines. Some of the other teaching work is I did include a module on reflective writing. I would consider going forward looking at feedback to wave up, or I've used feedback to wave up and to wave down in the students' writing and just saying, don't forget this or wave down or you need to do that. But going further, I think I might look to incorporate it in peer review and perhaps even in research of ways that actually manifest in students' writing. In terms of my own development of LCT, it's also a work in progress, but Jody and Martin and I have got a book chapter under review looking at specializations and constellations in reflection. And in my PhD coursework a couple of months ago, I did a paper on autonomy to investigate faculty and institutional values of internationalization. And just to wrap up.
Autonomy. Ooh.
Yeah, to give a shout out to colleagues who have been really quite supportive of exploring the theory and its inclusion in my pedagogy, and of several authors who are in attendance today who've shared their LCT work in collected volumes. So thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Has anybody got any thoughts, comments, or just want to jump in and just chat? I know a number of you have actually used LCT in various ways in teaching.
Yes, thank you very much, Jennifer. It's Ayumi from Kobe, Japan.
Nice to
And
see you.
thank you. I really enjoyed your talk. And actually, the topic you did is a kind of advanced version of what I'm going to do in 2 weeks' time. I've been working on semantic wave in a classroom scale teaching practice, and so I really enjoyed your talk, and I am now at the stage of trying to write up a translation device, and I am coming from a linguistic background, and when I start analyzing text, I go into details of saying and I'm also using, by the way, I'm also using semantic gravity. So what I'm trying to do is to analyze the reading text for the students and then compare that with summaries the students have been writing. But anyway, so what I'm having trouble with is that I'm going into detail of deciding whether it's semantic gravity is weaker or neutral or stronger, or maybe in between, and maybe semantic density comes in. And so I think this is the thing that all people who use semantic gravity or other tools in LCT would encounter, because when you go into detail, it's really difficult to identify which goes into which category. And you said that you only have three
Layers.
What is it? Yeah, layers, abstract, general, and specific, and you ask students to decide. And what if students have different ideas? So my question is, what if students have different ideas? And sometimes I, as a teacher, or now I'm trying to, as an analyzer, I start asking question, is it really abstract, or does it have any aspect of specific or everyday language, or general or abstract or whatever? So how do you deal with this kind of, crashes in disagreement in terms of?
To be perfectly honest, Ayumi, I don't, because I'm not having the students do a close analysis, and they don't have to be comprehensive. I'm completely sympathetic, and I think my only answer is to check in with others and did you get this? What do you think? But what I'm most interested in is the why and the discussion around it.
Right.
So the precision, and I don't want to I think analysis is very important, and I do very much respect those who do it and do it carefully and well. That's not my goal. And same with using SFL. People are like, well, you're building linguists. As much as I love linguists, no, my focus is to draw attention to text and meaning making. So if students are having a little bit of an argument about something, I'm happy because they're paying attention to it. And that's ultimately my goal, is the attention raising and the thinking about it. So I'm sympathetic. I don't really deal with it. I noticed in some of those annotations, the students disagreed with one another. Like, no, it's not this. I think it's this. It's the why that I'm after and that attention. But I didn't have them do a comprehensive analysis, partly because I don't feel particularly prepared at this stage to do my own particular analysis and to be that bastion of authority of what it is.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as a teacher, I would go along the way you do. Yeah.
My
Yeah,
goal
thank you.
was concept. There's types of information and you want it to move. Don't flatline, wave up, wave down.
Yeah.
Good enough. And I think right there that that's really quite powerful.
Yeah, thank you.
I had a question.
Yes.
Jennifer, thank you very much. I love both talks. Thank you. It's been wonderful to connect from lockdown New Zealand. My question for you is, based on the fascinating uptake that you shared with us of students using the meta language in some way, based on what you've seen, would you, in the way you teach and introduce it, would you change anything or would you do the same?
I mean, I think as conscientious instructors, we're always modifying and tweaking as best. I will be teaching the second half of this course next year, and so have to be juggling things around. And this is a lesson that I am planning on holding on to. I had to jettison or forfeit half of my content to another colleague, but this is a lesson that I am holding on to because I do think it really is quite powerful. The contextualized examples I will have to change because I'm changing disciplinary foci. I'm for a variety of reasons. And so that situatedness, I think, is really quite important. Perhaps I would do a little bit more comparison. The student comparison of the history starting at a strong semantic gravity versus the geography starting at a weak semantic gravity, I found fascinating. I might look for some of those examples. I might further refine the semantics and the specificity and just to make sure that it is actually relevant to the text that the students are looking at. And I might also put them on to look at an introduction, look at this section and particular stages, because my students are reading either textbooks or peer-reviewed research articles. And so we might do a little bit of a comparison around that, but not an overhaul. No, I find it relevant and not overwhelming with meta language and technical terminology, that it still has a takeaway that even I've typically introduced this. So this is the first time I've done it online. The year before I introduced it conceptually, and weeks and months later, I could say wave up or wave down, and the students got what I was talking about. And that in and of itself was quite powerful to the students.
Thank you.
I'll just take this opportunity to thank you for your chapter on reflective writing as well.
Anyone else want to just jump in? Just jump in. This is a really great space from which to, we've got a few more minutes to just sort of chat and discuss things and compare and ask questions as well.
Jen, there was a question in the chat from Penny Wheeler. Did you have teacher presence in the annotation stream as well?
Yes. So sometimes I would jump in. I also modeled it for the students at the outset, but I could go in and monitor. The annotation was part of the course that was going on. And the groups could only see their own groups annotations, but I also used the learning management system with very strong presence in my messaging and the lecturing. And so the presence was distributed, but I was in there, but I also didn't want to hold on to the entire, I didn't want the students to rely on me for the input. I wanted them to respond to one another's questions. And so backing away from that was also quite deliberate to facilitate that community building. Something that I didn't include here, but in the very end, we did a module on reflective writing, and to have the students talk about having made friends with one another around the world, never having met face to face, and the social and emotional support that became was really sort of I was really quite pleased with that as well. Who would have thought during a pandemic in different time zones that they would foster relationships? And I think the piece of that was the sustained groups. Everybody hates them at the outset, but the fact that they had to learn to work together and build that communication. And some of them reached out to me and complained about their partners, and then we talked and worked through it. Learning how to work in groups is also one of my ulterior motives, and it was really neat to see how the annotation fostered that, which is also why I wanted it to make their space.
Thank you.
And you having a shared language helps, like such as you've given them, the shared, meta language. I mean, one of the disasters of the unit I teach, which would be perfect for this sort of thing, is that they're not really taught anything they can use as a meta language. So this next week's readings and lectures about Donna Haraway, it is utterly incomprehensible to me as a professional sociologist what the reading's about and what the lecture's about. So what all these students from various subject areas are going to do with it, I have no idea. But it's without that, I can see the other flip side. Without having that shared language that they can then work together through, all you have is sort of silence, sullenness, and are generally trying to get on with each other, because students are generally pretty good people who are nice to each other in the main, but they have no ability to get on with any work in the I'm on. So maybe at some point I'll give a talk about the disastrous worst practice of how not to do this when you don't have any waving or any LCT or anything like that. Has anybody got any anything else before we go? I think it was really great, by the way, to have a week where we had like really practice-based stuff. I think it's really important. The LCT works to solve problems in people's research is extremely important. It's not there as kind of just intellectual gymnastics, but when it gets down to actually shaping practice and then being put into practice by teachers and students, I think, and then else in other fields, I think that's where it really shows its value, and that's when it really is something. It pays for its way, as it were, for being in existence rather than just being an intellectually interesting exercise. So I'm really pleased that both of you agreed to do a talk this week, and also that they're both very practical. I know we've got more coming from like LCT Japan, and I think that's really important because this sort of work doesn't get much of a public audience. One of the weird things about pedagogy is that it's not public, even though it's often done in front of people. The number of people is incredibly small, and it's very strong semantic gravity on its impact. So I hope at some point, you said you've done a paper already, I hope that you'll be also writing up about these things for any journal whatsoever that can get it out and about. Both of you.
Thanks for the nudge.
Excellent. Well, thanks everybody.
Sorry,
carry on, Jennifer.
Just picking up on your comment, Carl, in terms of, I think there's often not a lot of venues for the pedagogy at this level of detail because it's so contextualized.
I would disagree with that. I think there's an enormous amount of venues to do this in scholarship of teaching and learning and all sorts of places, EAP and stuff like that. There's increasing amounts of journals where people are writing absolute rubbish, but they're writing. And there's, I would, it's a case of you'd have to watch out for just how much theory you use in some of those venues. But I think, for example, Lee, you work in this field and in this kind of area, and people like Steve Kirk are actively publishing and about their own work, and Max Blackie did a paper about her own teaching of biology and so on. So I think it can be done.
Yeah, just finding the right venue.
Yeah, well, that's the same for all work, I think, is trying to find the right venue and to write it, you know, and to choose something very specific to write less, write more about less, and just focusing on one thing only. And, you know, but I always say to people that readers will get at most one idea out of your paper. So make sure it's not that the paper is really confused and difficult. But, you know, so yes, sometimes it is very incremental. You have to write one. The very first version of Senesh et al. On critical reflection stuff that uses semantic gravity, when they wrote the first draft, which I worked on, it had semantic gravity, semantic density, and all sorts of other stuff from SFL in. And I just cut everything but the semantic gravity in order to make the paper acceptable and comprehensible. And like, okay, we'll do the other stuff in another paper if we have a chance to. So yeah, it's difficult, but I think, I mean, I'm just going to encourage you and push you and nudge you and push you with a stick and say, you know, it's possible and it's appreciated out there. And, you know, the Roundtable is one way of being able to get it out as well. So we, you know, we can put this on the YouTube channel, for example. But I think there's a real thirst and hunger amongst editors for means of being able to do the sort of things that both of you have done this week. And so many of us are floundering with no understanding of what we could do, you know. And these issues that you're focused on have a universal relevance, however specific it might seem to you. It's just the case of finding the way of selling it to have a more universal relevance. And if I can take someone like Saul Richardson's thesis on, you know, jazz education and get him to sell talks about it as, you know, like, you know, universal relevance, because jazz is actually a really good example of highly constructivist pedagogy. But if you can take something as specific as that and sell it, then I think you can sell anything. So it's just a matter of selling it, how you package it, you know, to get people in for the start, I think, you know. But anyway, thank you everybody for being here. And also thank you both of our presenters this week. That was really great. And it's really good to see you all. And I hope to see you all in a couple of weeks' time. So there's one of these silent Zoom claps, which I find so dissatisfying, but it's better than nothing. Oh, yeah, and Lucy's doing rather good hand movements as well. So thanks very much, everybody. We will share this soon, if that's okay with Vicky and Jennifer.
It's okay. Thank you.
That's fine.
Awesome. Great. And Mauricio's been recording. So thanks, Mauricio. And I'll see you all in 2 weeks' time.
Well done. Lovely work. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you.
Good night.
Thank you.